Hello and welcome. This is FAQ number 2 for season 3. Today, I've got, as usual, some questions that were selected by the crew. They're printed out right here. I'm gonna read them for the first time and do my best to answer them. Here we go. Jay says, hey, I have a question. When I use normal organic soil and mix some dry amendments and like worm castings and other stuff, how do I know that the microbes are working and transforming fertilizer into nutrients? And where do the microbes come from? Thank you. This is a really good question, Jay. I'm glad this is part of them. I will relate other things. For instance, kimchi or bread making. Oftentimes the first question when it comes to fermentation, where we weren't really raised in this. I found in Western culture, I wasn't taught to make pickles and ferment and do all these things, but other cultures have been doing it for a long time. And so I feel like maybe our lack of awareness causes us to question things more, and that's a good thing. So when it comes to natural fermentation, like bread making, it's basically ubiquitous. So the bacteria that we're looking for is either on the material that we're fermenting or it's in the air. And it is ready to do its job. The situation has to be proper. So when it comes to vegetables, for instance, I was happy to learn when I learned about fermentation. Vegetables have never hurt anybody as far as being fermented. It's the canned vegetables that can have botulism. And so the first time I went to ferment something, I was like, well, do I need to buy a starter? Kind of like yogurt, right? No, you just chop up the vegetables, put some salt in there. That's it. It's almost that simple. So the question would be the same. Where do the good bacteria come from? Well, if it's grown on your farm, you're a lot more likely to have an abundance of that beneficial lactobacillus and other things that'll cause that fermentation, where if you just buy it at the store, it may not be so rich, but it's still there. You can buy cabbage at the store and you can make sauerkraut. So take it from that. The other thing that we did was fermentation of making the lactose serum. Early on, people were like, man, how do you know that's safe? What you're doing could kill you. Well, it turns out it's been really safe, and I've learned a lot more, and there's some definite reasons for that based on the materials that we use. But let's talk about soil, because that's what you're asking about. So when you're building a microbe home by making good potting soil, you're already starting the process. The worm castings that come from the worm bin are going to be laden in the beneficial bacteria that we're after. The soil amendments are going to be covered in it. When you take fresh soil and you mix the amendments in, you're going to notice blooms of life. And a lot of times people will call this mycorrhizae, or they'll call it fungi. More often than not, we don't know exactly what it is. But from limited research, we can see that there are species of bacteria that have this filamentous growth that look kind of like fungi that aren't. And they are oftentimes beneficial and part of the composting process. And normally when we're making potting soil, that's what we're seeing. So early on, I thought, oh, kashi is the only way I can see that snow, that Santa's beard on top of the soil. I've noticed applying almost any dry amendment does it. The most visible reaction that I've gotten is from malted seed or from the mustard seed. For whatever reason, the mustard seed, I think because it biofumigates, it eliminates the competition, and then the beneficial stuff just overtakes it, and you see this huge growth of that breakdown. And so if you're following a proven recipe, you're using organic compost, that's the starter for all the biology, and some organic amendments, those will also have the biology. I can almost guarantee you that you're gonna have a living soil. And the missing factor, just like compost making, is by having the amount of oxygen, or the amount of air, I should say, and the amount of water appropriate. And luckily this is, I can't say common sense, because when I first started I was clueless to it, but when you get to an understanding of gardening, there's this way to develop a common sense within that. And so when it comes to compost making, one could almost throw stuff in a pile and just leave it there. And a lot of home gardeners do it, but it takes years. So when you start reading about it, there's this carbon to nitrogen ratio that causes it to kick off with heat and start composting. But you learn quickly that even if you get that right, if it's bone dry, it won't happen. Or if it's waterlogged and just sitting in sopping amounts of water, that also won't happen. But somewhere in the middle, there's enough moisture for the microbes, there's enough greens and browns, the entire process kicks off and literally makes compost. The world record tomato grower, he makes his own compost following a super simple recipe. You can look that one up. Type in world record tomato compost. There's a lot of people that talk about how to make it. He used a kudzu vine, which is just what he had for free because it was wildly growing invasive species in his area. Coots, Clackamas coot, uses comfrey. All I'm getting at is none of these people used a bacterial starter or anything like that. It just comes from that process. So I hope that answers your question. I'll move on to the next one, but I want to make sure I hit every part of it. He says, how do I know the microbes are working and transforming it? Once you see that biological activity getting created, you can know that it's starting to happen. You're just going to have to trust the process. And I think that the more you do this, you realize that it's pretty straightforward process. It's very simple. So next question. Mew Mew says, hi there. I've been drying for 8 days at around 57% humidity and 70 to 77 degrees Fahrenheit. However, my humidity dips until 48% in the last 12 hours as I couldn't get in time to refill my humidifier. I know the feeling, but too dry is not the end of the world. And now some stems are cracked until breaking. Unhappy face. Is my crop ruined, or can I just raise my humidity for what it was before? It's not ruined at all. Immediately get the humidity back to where it was before and you'll be totally fine. I want to avoid this. I don't think it's ideal to have it dry, then wet, then dry, then wet. But if I had to choose a lesser of two evils, it would be getting a little bit dry. And the fact that you're just getting stem snap on day 7 from a 1-day drop in humidity means that it was getting closer to that point. Couple of steps. In our videos, we've talked about reducing the drying area size. This will help you if we're already a week in and our humidifier may not be keeping up. It's probably safe now to take this material, introduce it into like a Rubbermaid tub or something like that. And by condensing it together, so all the branches and all of the herbs are together now in a tight space, you can put the lid a little cockeyed just to make sure it doesn't get too wet. That'll rebuild the moisture. You can drop your humidity meter in there and watch it. Hopefully that does the trick. We're just trying to slowly bring it back. Alternatively, once it's in the tub, if you notice that it's not coming up to humidity like you'd like, you drop the humidifier in there or the hygrometer in there, and you can see that it's like reading 40%, even like in the plants in the tub, then you can put the lid on fully and see if over time it comes back. If not, the old trick is to grab like a tortilla from your fridge and throw it in there. That typically doesn't have enough moisture and it really slowly gives it to the plants. I'm sure you could use an orange peel or a million other things. Heck, I'm sure you could just take cannabis leaves that have some moisture, but for whatever reason, I like tacos, I have tortillas, and I've used them, and it works. And so what I'm getting at is reintroducing the moisture is good, but you don't want to be excessive. And so if it's in your dry room, it was only a 12-hour dip, and you have a humidifier that is now going to remain full, I wouldn't be scared to return it back to normal. If it's going to be a fight and it's going to be fluctuating a lot, because now what might be happening is your plants are dry enough that your humidifier cannot keep up. Day 1, it's easy. Your humidifier barely turns on because the plants are so wet. It's probably time to go to the tubs. It's just too much to keep up with. That will give you that slow dry for the last week. Once they are for sure dry and they don't have too much humidity and it's ideal, pop the lid on, set it aside. It's ready for trimming whenever you're ready. So I hope that helps. The opposite's the worst. Let me share a story. I was using a AC Infinity exhaust fan and I had a humidifier on. I would crank the humidifier on low. I would make sure when the humidity got too high, my AC Infinity would suck the air out. And that way I was kind of cheating the system and letting my humidifier do whatever it needed because I wasn't using the BuildASoil one. It didn't have the hygrometer built in. So I just had it on low, and well, I came home and my AC Infinity fan blew like a fuse or something. It literally, like, it should have been working. I thought it broke, but it worked the next day. And long story short, I opened my tent and it literally poured humidity out, and all the herb that was like halfway to drying was fully remoistened, and I think it lowered the quality a little bit. Not substantially, and so dryer's better. It's easy to add the moisture. Over wet was a major problem that could have been disaster had I not found out. So thanks for asking. I think that question will help some other people because you've worked so hard to get to that point. It can be a little discouraging when you're trying to keep it perfect, and it's not perfect, but I promise you that herb's gonna be fire. You've already made it 8 days and you're on the right path to correcting it right away. Okay, Dr. Green Thumb says, what's your idea on using maple sugar during flower? I don't have maple trees out here. I don't tap them and use it, and what little maple syrup that I buy, I use it for myself, but I wouldn't be opposed to trying it, right? We're just simple sugars, things that feed biology. You're gonna hear mixed reviews and say that, you know, sugar's bad and you're only gonna feed certain bacteria, but I feel like in nature, maple sugar is a natural source, and I would definitely not be opposed to trying it. However, I have no clue how to instruct you on doing that. I would probably start with like a teaspoon per gallon and feed it and just see kind of what benefits. I'd also start by Googling what type of nutrients and what type of benefits maple sugar might have in it besides just the sweetness, and I would consider that in my thoughts. Otherwise, I would not be scared at all. I just don't have an answer for you. Thanks for that. Lawrence says, what's your max yield in a 10x10? I just got one myself. Good question. Typical answer is the better you get, the better your yield. However, the better you get, the less you care about yield. For me and for most home growers, the goal is to have full jars with lots of flavors. By the next harvest, if you still have jars and you still are happy with all your flavors, you've absolutely succeeded. So yield just needs to be enough. If on the other hand, you're like a lot of new growers and you're thinking 2 plants in a little tent is gonna keep up with your habit, and you're like me, and so don't do that, like grow enough. But once you have enough, yield shouldn't be the top of the concern list. What I mean by that is best yield we've had in a 10 by 10 was probably the last round. I forget, I'd have to go look it up, it was like 6 pounds or something. And I could certainly improve that, but we're growing different genetics and we're having fun. If we monocropped a known yielder, like in this tent right now, on season 3, we have the, from Dominion Seed Company, we're running the Beefcake D. And the #1 cut that I have of it is thrown out. I mean, I can't even get my hand around it, they're so big. If I filled the tent with that cut, wall to wall, and just went for a longer veg time, maxed out the space, flipped it to flower, and had that thing where I was crawling under the canopy, I'm certain that I could hit 8 pounds plus, but I wouldn't enjoy the whole process. So I hope that answers your question. The old rule of thumb in a 4x4 was that if you could hit a pound in there, you're doing pretty good. Like, it's not like you had a really awful yielding strain. You didn't really like do the top yield that exists out there, but it was at least worth your time, especially if the quality's good. So use that for what it's worth. You hear people hitting 3 pounds a light, but I'm after the best quality. And so if you can hit a pound in a quadrant and have really good quality, I feel like the whole process is worth it. If you're hitting half that and you're still stoked on the results, there's probably room for improvement and we can help you get there. But that's how I answer max yield. It's all subjective. J-Dub, what's the Colorado summer environment like? Suitable for an outdoor grow? Would be dope if you did an outdoor grow series sometimes. This is a good question. I've always wanted to do an outdoor grow series. I'm not as much of an expert on outdoor growing for a couple of reasons. One, I've had some phenomenal outdoor grows out here, and it used to be the way. And then hemp came in and ruined everything, and most of us has kind of tucked tail and just stuck to inside. The environment is totally conducive for it. It does get a bit windy. It can be a little bit wet late season, but the right genetics and you can do a great job. I've done greenhouse growing out here at my old house here up Spring Creek, and I had some incredible seasons. I really love doing it. I've also done like 30 gallons late season is probably my favorite way to go for personal stash. I plant in like July in a 30 gallon, as many flavors as I want. They get to a totally manageable size. You get like ½ pound to a pound off each plant, really good quality. But I've had security concerns and it's kind of an attractive nuisance. So for me to do the job that I would want to do, I need to invest a lot. I've thought about it. We have Hortitech Direct, the net greenhouses. They're a rad company. They've offered to send us their like home greenhouse because we want to start selling them. We really believe in it. And I thought, dude, I'll document a little greenhouse series. And I thought, man, I'm gonna have a security guard out here if I do that. Like, I can't just have an outdoor grow on the street, not in a locked building, document it on YouTube. So I wanna do it. I've just not done it. I could maybe do a small one at my house, but I would consider it. If you wanna check out the homie Rootwise and his old grows online, I would look up Rootwise. He's a phenomenal big tree grower. A lot of times because of plant numbers, when you go outdoor, you're trying to grow your 6 plants as big as possible. And there's a whole methodology to that. Otherwise, I know AJ from Growing Organic was threatening to do a YouTube series on his outdoor grow, so I'd look for that. Good question. Sorry, I can't do it, but it's something high on our list of want to. So it might be a possibility in the future. If you got ideas about how we could demonstrate outdoor growing out here without the like safety concerns about, you know, throwing it on a veggie farm, we already get our greenhouse cut into and there's just lettuce in there. People looking for plants. So let me know what you think. Holland, when do you add worms to the earth box? Anytime you want. So if you set up a brand new earth box, day one's a great time to do it. In an earth box, limited size, so I don't want to throw like a pound of worms in there. It's just going to turn into a worm bin. But typically what I do is I throw like a handful, like 10, 15 worms in there, and they keep a great breakdown. Sometimes they live in the box. They'll go up when you fill the reservoir. They'll break down your nutrients in the mulch layer. I've had great results using the earthworms in the earth box, and you can literally apply them at any time. There's no rules to it. However, if you're watching this and you're worried about buying worms, you do not need worms in the earth box. The earth box is very efficient at breaking down the nutrients and delivering it to your plant, but I end up with worms in there anyways because of all the compost we use, and I love it. So do what you will. Josh, would a tea of sprouted white rice be beneficial? Yes, every single sprouted seed will provide significant benefit to the garden. There's almost no seed that you can go wrong with. I think what we would think when we say white rice, it's kind of like, oh, maybe there's not as much nutrients in there. The sprouted seed tea has nothing to do with nutrients and everything to do with enzymes. We're stealing the essence of life. We're tapping into this this amazing chemistry process that happens at the beginning of life and in other phases for lowering the energy required to get things done. And they're very specific. So that's what a sprouted seed tea is after. You can use any seed there is. Now, is there more benefit to a corn versus a rice when it comes to the actual seed tea? That is left to be determined. I'll tell you where this started. What's the easiest organic seed for you to get, and what's the lowest cost? That's what I would use. If you're using non-organic and you're using lots of seeds, we could be causing problems as far as chemicals. If you are using an expensive seed just to get a designer enzyme profile, nature doesn't care. The enzymes are very similar. The research that we can find on enzymes is usually related to beer brewing, so we're going to be talking about starch breakdown and amylase and stuff. But if you dig deeper, every one of those seeds still has protease and phosphatase and like all these other ones that we're after in every seed. That's part of why we use coconut water. It's like a drupe, not a seed, but same thing. We're stealing the beginning of life. So go ahead and do it. Use the white rice. Let me know what you think. My next question would be, I've never sprouted white rice. I don't know how easy it is or how well it would work in that regard. But if you get a little sprout and you steal the life from it and feed it to your plants, I think you're going to have a positive result. So use that for what, take that for what it's worth. All right, let's see. Busy Bee says, what's the best way to use my outside compost indoors? I have a massive outdoor 3-year-old pile, but I'm worried I'd transfer some unwanted bad things. Oh, this is a good question. The best way to use it indoors is to work your outdoor compost that's taken a few years through a worm bin. Typically, worms will eliminate almost any problem that you have. Last, you'll be left with maybe some fungus gnats, which is kind of ubiquitous in living soil. It's one of those last little problems that, you know, to get rid of, we kind of destroy the ecosystem. They're part of it, and it is what it is. We want to keep them to a minimum. So obviously, if you age your worm castings after they've come out of the worm bin, they'll be gone. You can mix some mustard into it after you've harvested it. We'll do an episode on dealing with it, of gnats and life and things like that in interesting ways outside of the normal thought pattern, right? Like maybe using your mustard to mix into your compost, having it biofumigate, then bringing it in after a couple weeks of sitting might be a great way to go. The other thought I have is a lot of times these home compost piles just are not very good for intensive vegetable gardening in the results that we're looking for, but they're still of value. And so when we bring them indoor, we want to make sure that it's worth it. Working it through a worm bin is a great way to make sure that it's worth it. Otherwise, I don't have a great answer for you. I'm the type that would just wing it and do it and see what happened. And I'm like, worst case, you might deal with a little something and you learn a lesson. There's some past videos I've done. I think they might be on Vimeo, but I did wild harvesting around my property, and I would go get fresh tips of like horsetail and clover and things around my property. I'd chop them up and top dress with them. And a lot of times people would be worried I'd bringing outside vectors in, and I never had one problem, just really good results. So use your gut judgment, pick from parts of your compost that look finished and aren't likely to bring problems in. Normally at a compost yard, the most damaging thing that can happen is you get compost from a yard waste place that has persistent herbicides in it, and you just don't know because it looks good and your plants won't grow. I think if you made your own compost, you'd know if there's herbicides in it, and so most likely the worst case is that it wouldn't be like as balanced or ideal in nutrients, but I really don't think you're going to cause a major problem besides like a spider, beetles, or flies or something weird, but it's not the end of the world. So let me know what you think. Other home composters, if you've got some ideas, let me know. Worm bin is kind of my go-to solution because it improves the quality of the compost, it fully finishes, and it removes a lot of the issues. Also, they've been known to remediate problems. So that's a good one for you. Also, if you've got access to cheap local compost, grab it, run it through the worm bin. Might make that local compost actually usable in your system, where before maybe it was a little too much one way or the other. Worms mellow it out. Let's see, Harris says, Jeremy, I switched from a T5 light to LED. My plant started growing 3-bladed leaves. How bad is this? You know, that's interesting. Typically what happens when your plants start growing 3-bladed leaves is you're usually entering like a re-veg period. And so they revert and then they go back. So did you have a lack of light during the switch? Like did your T5 break? They were without light for like 24 or 48 hours and then you put the new light up? That would cause a re-veg. And that's a hormonal shift. That's not really like a nutrient issue. And if it is a hormonal change and they've gone back to 1 leaf, 2 leaf, 3 leaf, something like that, we can grow out of that. If you're saying they were perfectly healthy and then you put it under LEDs and they went to 3 leaves, I'd suspect there's other visible damage on the plant, like it looks like hell is yellowing and getting weird. That would just be because of the DLI. I want you to look that up. If you had your T5 really close to the plant, there's a certain PAR value it's going to give you. And if you had it on 24 hours a day, it may have been fine. If you put your new LED in that's a lot more potent on the same number of hours in the day, It could be that you just jack the lighting like 10x and your plants could not hang with it. Ultimate answer is to dim them back and baby them and get them used to it. Really, you can take a plant from like a shop light Home Depot, put it an hour in the sun, put it back, put it 2 hours in the sun, put it back, a few hours in the sun, harden it off, and it's ready to rip under the new light. Same process goes at home. If you get a brand new big bad light and it's a lot more powerful than you're used to, you might want to put it on dim from the beginning and ramp them up. If you don't have a dimmer, you might want to put it really high and then drop it down. Many ways to do it, but without knowing more, the best I can tell you is, did they have a light switch where there's a hormonal change? If not, are they looking haggard? Light intensity, DLI, daily lighting integral. That's what I'd look to solve my problem. Otherwise, if the intensity of the light is not too much, it could be that for the first time your plants are transpiring so hard under the new light, now the humidity is not enough and some other factors. So get your environment right. Trust that the light's not too potent from research you can do, and there should be no reason for that. If so, it's not the light. So we need to really nail it down to what's happening here. Sometimes we get something new, and although it's correlative, it may not be the real cause. It's just that it happened at the same time we got a new light. So I want you to make sure, okay? All right, last question on the list. This is pretty good. Oz says, hello, I like the ingredients of the 3.0 soil, but was interested in the light soil also. Have you mixed the two together and done a soil test? Would you recommend it for a good balance, or maybe we could add it, maybe why could it be a bad idea? Thanks. I do this all the time. A couple reasons. Sometimes I don't want to cannibalize the store, and I'm like, oh, there's only a couple bags left of that or this, and I'll just grab 2 of each, mix them together and have fun. Alternatively, the light soil started with not much in it, and the 3.0 started with a shit ton in it. And it turned out that we had a little too much in the beginning, so we lowered it to the point where it was very balanced. And then we put the light soil, we started adding more to it because we always want to make things better, to the point now where mixing them really does work well. And certain plants that are more sensitive will crush it in the light, and the 3.0 might be just too much, but then they mellow out and get used to it. So when you mix the two together, you just kind of get a land between the two. And ideally, I think it could even be an ideal solution, meaning when you grab the light soil, it's great to top dress like right away. When you grab the 3.0, you might want to just wait a little bit. So if you mix the two together, it's kind of like souping up the light. I think you'll be totally good to go. The other factor to consider is some people buy the light soil because it's basically vegan, where the 3.0 has the Ollie Mountain, it has crustacean, it has a whole bunch more stuff in there. So some people don't mix them for that reason. I think mix them. You'll have great results. I've done it. Some of our customers do it. So hopefully that answers your question. If you've got questions that you want to see answered on our YouTube series just like these, then you're going to have to ask us by putting it in the comments down below. Hit the like button, tell your friends about this. The more traction we get, the more views we get, the more videos we're likely to make, the more that you interact with us and we see that it's exciting for you guys still, we promise to keep doing it. For season 3, I promised at least 1 or 2 more FAQs, as there's not much to do right now. The plants are finishing season 3 like beautifully, and I'm just literally letting them ripen. So until then, I'll see you guys on the next FAQ episode.